everybody, I'm Sharon and this is Heritage Journals, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a slow stitch junk journal cover. Now I'm going to be using one of my kits that I put together to make covers, but you don't have to use a kit. You can use whatever materials that you have. I'm going to show you using my kit so that you can see what type of things to look for if you're gathering your own materials, and how to put them together. I'll give you some ideas about that. So I'm going to go through what's in the kit so that you can see what there is, see what you need to gather. Then I'm going to show you my process of how I start putting together a junk journal, slow stitch junk journal kit. That's a tongue twister. So to begin with, I'll show you a few things that are in my kit. So it always comes with, of course, some embroidery floss, at least 3 colors. This one has 4 because I felt like it needed 4. So you can just set those aside for now. I always include a handmade pin cushion with some pins and needle, and there will also be a needle threader in that. I'm not going to use this today because I'm going to include this one in one of the kits. So I'll just set that aside. And I should also mention that this is one of my new kits, and it's called Storybook Threads. And the idea behind it is it's largely primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And I thought it would work really well to make a journal with children's illustrations from children's books, because some of those illustrations, especially from the vintage ones, are just incredible. So I thought this would be a fun and a bit whimsical way of doing that. So let's start with the special pieces, because those are the most fun. So I always include some kind of an applique. Now in this one, these are 2 that I've made. There's this little basket here with selvages in it, and there's a little girl. I'm probably not going to be making the little girl again. I'm going to use her in this kit because I think she's really cute, and I want to make sure to use her. But she took me hours to make, so it's just not feasible for me to make a bunch of her. But anyway, I will be using her. If you do like the little basket, that's going to be one of the options with the other kits. And I've got a few other different little appliques that I've made as well. So we'll set those aside, because any of this special stuff, we'll just set it aside for the moment, because it's going to go on the top. And when you're making this slow stitch cover, you kind of start from the bottom and you work your way up. So we'll set those aside for now as well. Just set them up there. This is an adorable little piece of vintage fabric. I got it at a thrift shop from a child's piece of clothing, and it was maybe for a child that was 6 months old. And so it's not very big, but I do have a few pieces of it, and I think it's adorable. So this is a piece, even though it's just fabric, I'm going to be using it almost as an applique. There's some different flowers. I've got this really pretty blue floral as well. A couple of pieces of vintage ribbon. One thing I want to mention is this bottom one has clowns on it. I know that there are a lot of people who really don't like clowns. So if you're one of those people and you would like to get this kit, please tell me and I won't include any clowns. And then just some other small little applique bits to add at the end. We've got some lace. Now some of the lace is vintage, some of it is not. I try to just include a variety in the right colors. So something I should mention is that not all of these kits are going to be identical, because it depends on what materials I have, and because I do try to provide as much vintage as I can and reclaimed fabric wherever I can. I don't always have vast quantities of them, so some of these are going to be smaller bits. So those are the laces. This is another piece of vintage fabric that I have. I think that might be a squirrel maybe, but I think he's really cute. We'll put him aside. And then I always include a few pieces of doily or sari silk or embroidery, things like that in the kit. Now this piece, even though it is a piece of fabric, again, I'm going to be using this little sandal, potentially the sunglasses, as an applique. So I'm going to set that in that pile. The same with this one. I like this little fox. I think he's adorable. And on this piece and this piece, I'm going to be cutting out some of those fish and adding them. So those, pardon me, are the special pieces. This is the little booklet that I have made to include in the kit. It's called Slow Stitching Made Simple. It's not very complicated. It's pretty basic, so we'll be going through what I've got in here today, and I'll just give you a little bit more information into my thought process, especially in this area, about starting your base and how you layer things and put things together and get going on it. And honestly, once you get going, you'll find that it's easy. It's really not very difficult. And I'm certainly not a pro when it comes to slow stitching. I'm still learning myself in a lot of ways, but hopefully, you know, if you want to see how a beginner does it, this will give you an idea of where to start. This is just how I do it. There are plenty of professionals out there that really know their stuff that you can also find on YouTube that will give you some great options. And I'm going to show you, maybe I'll just leave them in this little container. I always include buttons, beads, and sequins in with my kits in coordinating colors. So that's what this one has. You'll see a number of different color, shapes, sizes, and those can all be used to decorate at the end as well. So I'm going to set that aside. And then we get to the fabrics. So I always include a background or a backing fabric to put on the back side after you're done slow stitching your cover. And this will cover up all of the backs of your stitches, so you don't need to worry about making the back look pretty. I certainly don't. My backs look terrible, but I don't care about that because the fronts look pretty. So I always include a piece to coordinate with that. That's going to be the very last thing that we put on. And then I always include also a piece of batting and a piece of very thin fabric. So this one is, I believe, a vintage cotton, and it's very, very thin, which is helpful because as you get going through layers and layers of fabric, sometimes it can be more difficult to stitch. So it's nice having the thinner fabric. So I'll use this until it's gone, and then I'll find an alternative. So here are all the colors of fabric. So you'll see that there are multiple shades of red, some reds and blues, reds, blues, and yellows, wherever I can find them. A piece like this I found in a thrift shop. I'm not sure if it's vintage or not, but I only have an 8x8 square of it. So this kit and the next 3 that I sell will each have a little piece of this fabric, and that's all I've got of that one. This is one of my very favorite ones. It's kind of a, it looks like a reproduction of maybe a feed sack or something like that, but it's got all of the right colors in it, the red, the blue, and the yellow, and it's one of my favorites. Another piece of vintage there. So this gives you an idea of some of the fabrics. And while you might not get exactly the same fabrics in your kit, and of course if it's a different color palette, you'll get entirely different fabrics, this is about the amount that I try to include in each of the kits. And so one of the questions I've had asked is, do I need to use all of the fabric? And the answer is no. Absolutely not. In fact, I don't think that you could use it all in one cover, but I like to give options because I know when I'm making something, I like to have options, and sometimes there are certain pieces of fabric that really grab me, that I definitely want to use more than others. So I like to provide options for you. So you don't need to use all of the pieces that are included. The other question I've had is, do I need to use them in the size that you provide, or can I cut them up? And the answer to that is absolutely, you can cut them up. So I don't do that for you because, again, that gives you options of how you want to use them. So I'll show you how I lay it all out today and cut them up, and then that'll hopefully give you an idea of how to go about it. So those are the blues. And then I also have some of these fun ones that have more multicolors on them. Some of them have pictures, some of them have just different colors in a pattern. piece like this one here is, it's a vintage piece. And I don't have a lot of that one, but it's pretty. And then just some different, this one, for example, I think was a vintage pillowcase, and it has a really pretty little pattern on it. This piece here, I only did have a strip this wide, which is why the balloons are cut off, but the colors are perfect, so I'm going to try to use that somehow. And then my very favorite piece in this whole kit is this piece here. I think it was a vintage sheet, and a friend found it at the bins and was kind enough to let me have it because I loved it so much. So this is kind of what you need. You don't need as much of fabric. If you're finding your own, you don't need as much as is included in this kit, but it gives you the idea of the type of fabrics. And I try to provide a variety of patterns as well, so that they're not all florals, they're not all geometrics, but that it gives you a variety so that you can choose what you like, and also so that things will stand out. Because if you have all florals, nothing is going to stand out. Whereas if you have florals surrounded by some geometrics or calmer, more neutral patterns, you're going to see more of them. So the first thing that I do when I'm making my slow stitch covers is pick the background fabrics. So for those, I personally like to use lighter colored fabrics. So this one is maybe a little bit dark, bit dark. This one is perfect. It's pale, but it's got a little bit of red on it. So I'll set this one aside to use for the backing. Those are a bit too dark. What else do I have for red? Maybe this one. Okay, so that's the ones that I'll set aside for the red. Now for the yellow, this is a nice pale one, and it's a nice large piece. So we'll set those aside. Those are brighter ones. This would be good for the background because it's kind of a nice pale yellow. Also this one, it's a pattern with both red and yellow in it, but it's kind of pale as well. And these two would also work, but I really think that we've got enough yellow to cover the background there. So I'm just going to set these ones aside and pick a few pieces of blue. I like this blue spotted one. It's a nice pale one. This is a really pretty piece of fabric. I just love this one, and that would be good as well. And probably that's enough for the background. Yeah, so let's start with that. We'll set these aside. And of course, you can always add in whatever you like, but this is a good place to start. Blue, yellow, multiples. There we go. Now everything's organized. So when you first set up your base, measure the size of your cover just in pen, a little bit in from both edges. Now you can, I always provide a piece of batting base fabric and backing that's at least 10 by 13. Often they're a little bit bigger than that, but they're at least 10 by 13. So measure in a little bit from the edge on both sides, and you want it to be 9 inches tall by 12 to 13 inches wide. So if you just want it to be one signature, 12 by 9 is fine. If you want it to be 13 inches, which is what I'm going to do because I want to put 2 signatures in it, so I want it a little bit wider, then you measure it 13 wide. And then when you fold it in half, you'll have either 6 by 9 or 6.5 by 9 journal cover. So I just do this in pen. It doesn't matter if it shows or not because it's all going to be covered up. But the reason that I do this is because when you're slow stitching, it tends to pull in a little bit. It's not the same as regular embroidery that you do in a hoop that's stretched, that doesn't lose its shape as much. And I found when I was doing my first cover that the edges ended up a little bit wavy, and I would have liked to have trimmed them even. But because I stitched right to the very edge of the fabric, I couldn't do that without cutting my stitching, and then of course I'd have to fix all of that, which wouldn't be good. So this is a way around that. We're going to make the cover just within this section, and then when we're done, we'll trim it down so that you can get a nice square edge to it for your journal. So what I'm going to do is start by layering my fabric. So I love this piece of blue, so I think I'll start with it. And I am going to cut it down because I don't think we really need a piece this big. So I'm going to cut a piece off, about in half, I guess that one is. And I'm just going to be layering it inside of the lines. So you want to put your fabric kind of up to the lines. And when we later are slow stitching, in case I forget to mention it later, you don't want to stitch right to the very edge. You want to just leave it a little bit inside so that when we do go around and trim it afterwards, you don't risk cutting your stitches. And then when we finish the edge of the journal, that little extra part will be caught in to the edge stitching. So we've got that piece there. And what I like to do is when I've got, I like to work in at least threes, so it's nice to have at least 3 pieces of blue in different spots. So let's use some of this one as well. Maybe we'll put a piece down there in the middle and a piece kind of over here on the edge. So those are my blues, and I try to find a balance so that I don't have blue heavy or one color heavy in one spot and not another. Now this piece I think is super cool, and I'd kind of like it to wrap around the spine. So something to remember is that you can kind of just mark the middle, so around there. Doesn't need to be exact, it's just to give you an idea. And I find that when it's better not to put a piece of fabric that ends right at the spine, because then when you curve the fabric, it can catch. So try to overlap the spine. And I think that would be a cool piece to wrap around the spine. And I think I will put the blue over top of it. And now let's add in some yellow. Cut this piece down as well. We don't need a giant piece. Let's do this. And then maybe we'll add some of this one in. And again, you can do this however it looks pretty to you. There's not a rule that it has to be done a certain way, and especially because it's for a junk journal. And one of the things I love the most about junk journaling is that there aren't rules. You know, you can do whatever you want, and it's completely acceptable. So that's what I like about this, one of the things. So don't pressure yourself to try to make it perfect, because it doesn't need to be, nor should it be. It should be just how you think it looks pretty. Okay, so now we've got 3 yellows. Let's add in a bit of red. Okay, so now we've got, it's not as important on this layer, but one of the things that as we build up the layers that we need to watch for, or that I watch for, is I try not to put everything facing the same direction. So not all the long pieces together like this. In this case, it's okay because we're gonna have these parts of these covered up. So that's not going to be as noticeable. But as the layers as we get more towards the top layers, it's nice to try to vary the heights and the heights and the widths and the directions that the fabrics go. All right, so now we've got that done. Let's add in some of this pretty little red piece. Let's do that there. And another thing that I should mention is it's good to overlap your fabric. It makes it much easier to stitch. So because before we start stitching, we're going to be covering most of these seams with other fabrics. On this layer, doesn't matter as much, but definitely as we get higher up, you want to not butt the fabrics up against each other. Like you wouldn't want to put it like that, because as you stitch it, you're going to end up with a gap, and it's a pain to do that. So it's much easier to overlap your fabrics. So that's not only okay, it's actually a really good thing. Okay, now let's add in a little bit more of this blue. How about there? And maybe there. And I think we'll bring the yellow to the top there, and then the red to the top there. And then we've got this pale yellow left. Now, normally I would maybe try to fill in some of these spots with the pale yellow, and that's what I was going to do. But I also don't want to have it so thick that it makes it really difficult to sew through. So now I'm thinking maybe we'll start adding the next layer and fill in some of the spots with that. So there's a couple of pieces in these multicolored fabrics that I really love. And what I do is I always go through and pick out the pieces that I like the most first. And those are the ones that I'll use at first, and then as it goes, as we go along, we can always add in more pieces, but I want to make sure I get the pieces that are my favorites in as well. So I really like both of these pieces. I think this one here would be really pretty to kind of put, let's see, no, let's do it this way, to sort of put at the top corner there. This is going to be the back cover, this is going to be the front cover, but I think that's a pretty spot for that. Now this piece here, I do really like the pattern on it, and I love the texture. It's kind of this fabric is a bit of a waffle texture, and I really like that. But it is an older piece of fabric, and I don't know if this is what the original color was intended to be or not. It looks kind of grayish to me. So I'm going to probably cover up most of this whitey gray color as we go along with maybe some buttons or sequins or stitching so that the flowers stand out, because I think the flowers are very pretty. And maybe we'll put that. That would be kind of pretty going around the spine down here as well. So let's do that. Now, at this point, I'm going to go through the colors, the three different colors, the reds, yellows, and blues, and just pick out my favorite pieces. So I love this piece. I love this mustard yellow. It's one of my favorites of all time. And there was a floral one here that I just love as well. So I'm going to focus with these three yellows. I think it would be pretty to use the eyelet and these little ladybugs. I love this heart fabric, and I love that one. So we'll use those blue ones first, and then in the reds, we'll use my favorite little flower there. Definitely this piece, and I love this piece. Let's see what we can do with that. All right, so as I'm looking down, I can see that the blue is what jumps out at me first. So I'm going to add in, there's not a lot of red, so I think I'll add in a bit of red first. And maybe we'll start with this one that I really love here. Cut off a piece of that. And because that is such a pretty piece, maybe we'll put it right so that it shows on the front cover. And then a piece of this pretty houndstooth, which is also, I believe, a vintage piece. Let's do it this way. Some of these pieces are kind of hairy and a little raggedy on the edges because they are older fabrics that I've come across. Some of them I've washed because they really needed it. So if you like that look, you're welcome to keep it like that. I don't mind that look, but I find it more difficult to sew with it. So I tend to trim it off at this point in the process. And then I think it'd be nice to put some red there. So now we've got red kind of going throughout main cover. I still want to use this piece, so we'll set that there. Now I'm going to add in some yellow. I love these pears. Where would they look good? How about up? Well, no, you know what? I had decided to put this here. So I'm going to have for my closure a blue button, a large blue button that's going to go there. And so I wanted to use something yellow underneath it so that there's that contrast and it really shows. So because this is now getting closer to a top layer, I'm going to make sure that I've overlapped this piece on top of all the pieces under it so that it doesn't pull apart. And then I'll just trim off that little bit. And let's add some pears, maybe just a smaller piece. How about something in there? Now you see I cut that too small, and so it won't overlap, and I don't think that's a good idea. So let's use the bigger piece and then overlap it so that I think we'll pull this piece to the top. So you just kind of really play with it at this point until you find a design, a pattern, a layout that you really like, and see that's how you know when you're done, is if you like it. If you don't like it, you're not done, and that's okay. I think it was Carrie Griffiths that I first heard that from, and I always thought that was an excellent saying, that if you don't like it, if it's just not done yet, doesn't mean it's bad. All right, now I love this blue heart fabric. It's so pretty. And I have enough of this that the first few kits in this series will be able to include a piece of that. Let's include that there. How about this eyelet? Where should we put this eyelet? Maybe down here. It's not very straight. In some of these, it's very difficult to tell what's the front and what's the back, but I always think, well, if I can't tell, nobody else is going to be able to tell either. So let's do it this way. And oh, we want to use this pretty little ladybug piece. How about we put that there to cover up that white spot? So at this point, if we take a look, kind of step back and look at this, you can see that it's actually a nice balance of reds and blues and yellows, and all of the backing fabric is covered. Now remember that this is just the beginning, so definitely there's going to be additions where some of these spots that have all of the edges together will have something over top of them. Let me see if I can find maybe my little patches. So for example, I don't like the way that this looks here, and I'm not wild about having that little strip there. So this would be a great place to put a piece of ribbon, and then maybe my little patchwork girl. Or here, where you can kind of see it's not a very pleasant way that all of the edges look together, that would be a good place to put the basket. So those are things that we can figure out later, but as long as you kind of got the balance of it right now, and the color in a balanced way that you like it, this is a good place to stop at this point. So at this point, what I do is I start the slow stitching process, and I do slow stitch lines all the way across the whole thing until it's all joined together. And then after that, we start adding more layers of all of the pretty things and the fun things, depending on how we like it. So I'm going to show you now how I start doing the slow stitching. And I used to just pin it, but all of the videos that I've watched, a lot of the expert slow stitchers like Sarah Humphrey, who is amazing. If you haven't seen her channel, you should definitely look it up. I'll try to remember to link it below because I've learned a lot from her. And she always bastes. So I've tried it both ways, and I find that what works for me is kind of a combination of the two for this project. So to begin with, I'm going to pin. Just, you don't need to use a ton of pins. We just want to kind of hold things in place so that when we baste, they're not moving around. The other thing I should mention is my brain likes the up and down lines of pieces. It just does. I'm not very good at being random. So if you like doing things on a curve and adding in circles and strange looking pieces as far as shape goes, please do that. I envy you if your brain works that way, because I wish mine did. I'm always working on trying to be more random, not always so successfully, but I'll get there. Alrighty, so basically just start pinning some of these pieces in place just to kind of keep things from moving. And I try to kind of pin through all of the layers wherever I can. Now that doesn't have a piece on it, so you see when you pin this one down, you're pinning the yellow and the blue all the way through. So maybe you need a piece here. Some of these fabrics are getting thick already, so it's harder to get through them. Okay, that pin is bent. Let's throw that out. All right, so once you've got some pins put in so that it's not going to be moving around, at this point I'm going to baste. And basting, I used to think, oh, that's going to take forever and it's such a pain, and it really doesn't take very long, and it does make it easier because I find when I'm just using the pins, I am constantly stabbing myself. Maybe that's just me, and I tend to be kind of clumsy when it comes to pins, but I don't like to bleed on my projects, and so I try to be careful, but yeah, I do stab myself a lot when it's just pins. So I find that kind of doing a combination works well. Now what I just did was I took some of the embroidery floss. You can also just use plain fabric thread for this if you have some, but if not, the embroidery thread works fine. And I just stripped out, pulled it in half. Each one of these skeins has 6 strands. I don't know if you can see here. They're all comprised of 6 strands, and so you can kind of pull them apart and just do it slowly and kind of stretch and twist as you go so that it doesn't get tangled. And then the easiest way for me that I found to thread the needle is you hold your fabric or your thread in your fingers like that, and you take the needle to the thread and kind of just pinch it through, and that works. And so then you want to tie a knot in the other end. I usually do a double knot. I have watched many videos over the years of quilters who somehow do this little twisty thing with their fingers and do a quilter's knot. And I've tried it and it doesn't work. So I just tie a double knot. Leave a long tail. It just makes it easier to pull out because none of what we're doing right now is going to stay. This is just to hold things in place so that we can do the slow stitching. So I'm going to start up here, and it's going to be big stitches, but I do find initially, the first time I did it with the basting, I did big stitches, but I did too big of stitches. So you do need to have 2 or 3 stitches in each piece of fabric in order to really hold them in place. Otherwise, they move. And then you need to go back in and add some pins to kind of keep them in the place where you want them. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of the basting. So I do try to do that. Now at this point, it's fairly easy to pull the needle through. You'll find as we add more layers and it gets thicker that it's more difficult to get the needle through. And at that point, I find having a little pair of pliers is tremendously helpful. I have problems with my hands, and so trying to grip the needle and yank it through, even with one of those little grippy things for needles, I find it tends to hurt my hands. So I just use a little pair of pliers, and when the needle gets stuck in the layers, I just pull it through, and it works really well. Yeah, and you'll notice as I'm doing this, I did butt these two up together, and so as I'm, even just as I'm basting, you can kind of see how they're splitting, and you can see in between them. The reason that's okay at this point is because it's still just the bottom layer, and we're going to be covering up those gaps with stitching or lace or trim or something like that. Okay, now that I'm at the end, I'm just going to turn the corner. Okay, now when I get to this point, I could maybe get one more stitch. I don't stitch until my thread is really short, because I hate trying to knot thread that's too short. So the easiest way to make a knot that I found is you take your needle, you wrap the thread around it twice, pull it through, and then you hold it down with your nail and pull, and you've got a knot. And I learned that actually from a channel called Christine's Home Affairs. I used to just do it once, but then it's not really a knot. And this works terrific for that, and it doesn't take very long. So then you can cut that. All right, so now I've started a new piece of thread. I left off here, so I'll pick up where I left off on this red piece. And at this point, it's probably, I find it easiest to turn the fabric rather than try to go up and down. So if you just turn it, you can go all the way around if you want, or you can go back and forth. There's not a science to this at all. We're just making sure that the fabric is going to stay in place while we do the rest of our stitching, and then we'll pull all this stuff out. So I'm going to finish basting this, and then I will come back. I'll do that off camera, so you don't need to watch me do it. And then I'll come back and show you what the next steps are. Okay, I'm back. So I finished doing all of the basting, and I've removed the pins. You'll see I switched to the yellow embroidery floss partway through to do the basting, because I intend to do all of my base slow stitching in the white, and I know that I probably won't need as much yellow for finishing stuff as I will white. So I decided to use up some of the yellow for the basting, because it's all going to come out anyway. And it's actually kind of nice, because then you can see where your threads are to pull them out there when they're super obvious like that. So I've threaded my needle with 3 strands of the embroidery floss, and I'll just show you how I get started here, and then I will go away and finish slow stitching this first layer before I come back in the next video and show you how to start adding more to the next layers. So one thing that I've learned is I don't like to start right to the edge, right close to the edge with my first stitch, because the knot from the stitch sometimes will stick out. And so you could cut it, but even by mistake, but even if you don't cut it, it's kind of a pain to have it right on the edge, because then when you're trying to bind it and everything, it's, I don't know, it's just difficult to work with. So I always try to start in a little bit from both edges. So I think what I'll do is I'll start right about here, where you can see where the needle is, which is kind of going to catch all three of these first fabrics. So you want this one, you want to go from the back. So I start, let's start right there. So you can see that I brought my thread up so that it's coming through all three of these pieces of fabric to start with. And eventually, of course, I will finish stitching here, but I just want to start the stitch in more towards the middle so that we don't have that knot situation happening right on the edge. So it might take you a little while to kind of get the rhythm of slow stitching. I know it did for me. And I think it's just one of those things that the more you practice, the better you get at it. I'm certainly not perfect at it yet either, but I'm happier with how it's working. So your first stitch to do this part anyway, I just use a running stitch. And a running stitch is basically just going in and out of the fabric in like a long line. So I tend to try to put a couple of stitches on at the same time. And then this is where the pliers come in super handy, because when you're getting that on, sometimes it's hard to get the eye of the needle through all of the fabrics. So I just give it a tug with the pliers, and then it pulls right through. And basically I just do this all along and then turn around and come back and just do it all the way down. So there's, again, I don't think there are any rules around how this needs to look. You just need to be happy with it. You're doing it for yourself. So as long as you're happy with how it looks, I think that's what matters. So the stitches can be longer, shorter, however you want to do them. Don't worry too much about making it perfect. One of the other things that I learned is that often as I'm going along, because I don't draw a line or anything to get everything perfectly straight, sometimes I find that my stitching tends to veer down or it'll go up, and then it's not straight. And sometimes by the time, I don't notice that until I'm done. I don't want to pick out a whole line of stitching, and I don't try to make it perfect anyway. But with this type of a project, one of the great beautiful things about it is that because we're adding layers, if there's a spot you really don't like, you can always cover it up. You can cover it up with trim or patches or any kind of applique, even just with some extra stitching when we do the decorative stuff at the end. So don't worry too much about that, and just kind of, eyeball it, do your best. And I think the most important thing is to enjoy it, because for me anyway, this whole process of slow stitching is a form of self-care. I find that when I'm doing it, my mind calms down. I'm not thinking about all of the bazillion things that I need to do every day. It's just a very relaxing, calming process for me. And so trying to make it perfect would ruin that. And so I just work away at it. And before you know it, you'll have done a few rows, and it's very, very satisfying when you start getting a few rows done. So I'm going to, I think I'll do maybe 2 or 3 rows here just so that you can kind of get the idea of how it looks. And I'm going to speed that part up so that you don't need to watch me in real time. But, and then I'll come back. But it'll give you an idea kind of how it's going to look as you go. So I'll do that now and speed it up, and then I will be back. right, so I'm going to stop there, but that gives you an idea of what it's going to look like. I like to keep my rows relatively close together. That's probably, oh, I don't know, maybe 1/4 of an inch, a little over 3/8 of an inch maybe apart, but you can really do them as close or as far apart as you like. There, again, aren't any rules for that. So, and you don't even need to have them the same distance apart from top to bottom. You can have different distances if you want. It comes down to what you like. So yeah, so you can see I started here, went all the way back, and then I'm probably going to tie off my thread by the time I get to about here. And I try to just always keep my knots in the middle at the bottom and not on the edges. And up here, I will eventually come back and just start there and go the other way and go back and forth. So yeah, that's kind of how to get started with it. So I'm going to leave the video there today. If you have any questions at all, please do let me know. You can just leave a comment at the bottom of the video, and I will answer for sure. I'm not sure if I'm sure there are things that I've missed, but I've tried to cover the basics so far. But if there are things that I've missed, please let me know, and I'm happy to answer those as well. So I'm going to finish doing this part of the cover with the slow stitching all the way across, and then in my next video I'll come back and we can start adding some more layers to make it look even more fun and interesting. And that is my favorite part, is getting to add all the trims and the pretty stuff. So I hope that you will join me and come back again. I hope this has been helpful for all of you. Thanks so much for watching. If you're able to like and subscribe, I'd super appreciate it. And I will see you next time. Thanks so much.